Hey there, man. Mike Yarbrough of Wolf and Iron here. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Truck Talk Thursday. Happy Truck Talk Thursday to you all. So we're going to be talking today about all these new gender non-conforming pronouns and a little bit about the transgender stuff. This may be a two-parter episode. We'll just have to see. But this is kind of a big one to tackle, especially as I'm driving along in my truck, but I've just had it on my mind for a while. It seems like there's been a slew of YouTube videos that have popped up for one reason or another talking about this. So I don't know if this is getting to be big in the news. I know Canada has had some laws related to this that are trying to be passed anyhow, some resolutions that are trying to get passed to put certain ways of speaking to people, and I think the same things in New York as well. The way we refer to people actually is being put into law, and that's pretty scary stuff. So I want to talk about that this episode, but before I do, let me just welcome the new guys. Fellas, if you're just checking out Wolf and Iron for the first time and you're just tuning in to a Truck Talk Thursday episode, let me say welcome to you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in. And, actually, I guess people don't actually tune in anymore. We just push a button. So thanks for buttoning in, I guess. The Truck Talk Thursday episodes are just a way for me to informally chat with you guys about whatever's on my mind. Something that I think guys need to hear about, I need to talk about. And a lot of times it will relate to social matters. Sometimes it will also relate to entrepreneurial things. Just kind of runs the gamut here. And look, if you want to get plugged in a little bit more with what Wolf and Iron has going on, we got a website, in case you didn't know that, wolfandiron.com. You can head over there and kind of see some of the past episodes and some of the articles and things like that. We also have a free Facebook group, which is just fantastic. You guys can join that by heading to wolfandiron.com/thegroup. That'll take you over to our Facebook page. There'll be a few questions for you to answer there. Please answer those, because if you don't, you don't get in. And if you answer them wrong, you don't get in. We don't let just anybody in the group, guys. We try to keep it as a high caliber group of men with high caliber discussions. And that seems to be going very well. So head over there, be part of the conversations, especially on topics like this where we need guys chiming in. We need a lot of thoughts on this. So let's talk about this a little bit here. Non-gender conforming pronouns. Now, what does this mean for you guys who may be new to this? So we typically refer to people as a he or a she, or if they're in a group, we call them they, which is non-gender specific. There has been a movement afoot, particularly in Canada, and then some of the big cities like New York, and I imagine some things happening in California as well, to introduce some new pronouns, and not just introduce them socially speaking, but really to get people to buy into these things illegally and really be forced to do these things. My guess is probably from the schools and sort of public institutions, where new pronouns such as, instead of he, it would be Z or Z-I-E, or instead of her, it might be here, H-I-R, but it's pronounced here. And these things don't necessarily relate to a masculine or a feminine. It's people who don't necessarily belong into one group or another, or at least don't feel like they do. Now, there's a number of issues with this. There's a lot of different places we can go with this. One of the issues is that it introduces the normalization through basically the use of declared speech, right? Like what is declared to be true and right and good speech, right? By the authorities, and if you could see me, I'd be doing air quotes. By the authorities, which basically means legal people. The legal people will decide what is, allowed speech and not allowed speech. Now, if you guys have read 1984, this all should start to sound pretty freaking ominous to you. But it introduces the normalization of something that society should not consider normal. Now, I'm trying to say this as sensitively as I can. I know that there are a lot of people who maybe take up the mantle of being anti-gay, anti-transgender, and that's kind of like their platform, right? And they just come at it hard and heavy. I don't really do that. I'm anti these things, don't get me wrong, but I think we need to have discussions about it. That's really what's missing from today in society. So we need to have these discussions about this stuff. There are certain things that society should consider as the best and the right way of doing things. Marriage between a man and a woman that stay married and fall in love and remain in love and build on their love and work to protect their family and provide for their family and work through their faults and those kinds of things. This sets the standard for an excellent family, an excellent next generation. And so that really should be the standard that we're upholding. That should be the thing that we're championing from the rooftops. When we talk about what it means to be married, that's sort of the ideal picture, and you can add more to that if you like. To be a biological man that feels like a man, or be a biological woman that feels like a woman, and is proud to be one or the other, is something that we should be championing, right? That is by all common sense standards and by all natural biological standards, that's the thing that we should be about. They're going to exist by the fact that we're human and there are differences and we live in a fallen world and what have you. There are going to be differences amongst us where people don't agree with those things. So I'm not naive enough to think that we're going to have some kind of utopian world. That's not what this is about. But we need to be at a place where we know what is good and what is right. And those are the things that we push for. So if we're talking about those things in our schools, amongst ourselves in society, those are the things that we push for. The things that we say are allowed. Yeah, maybe homosexuality is something that's allowed. Maybe transgenderism is something that's allowed. I mean, who knows? Maybe in 25 or 30 years, people are deciding that they want to genetically alter themselves to represent more like an animal of some kind. Maybe those are things that are allowed just by the nature of human freedom. But just because something's allowed doesn't mean that it's something that is the best. So, one of the good tests for this, and this isn't a perfect test, but it can go a long ways, is to ask yourself this. If everyone in society did the thing, whatever it happens to be, become transgender or become gay, would that work? I mean, practically speaking, would that work out? So we could take this with transgenders, for example. If everybody in society became transgender, would that work? Well, no. Obviously, it wouldn't work. It'd be a tremendous amount of confusion. There'd be a lot of sterile people walking around. The same as with people being gay. You can't have a whole society where everybody is gay because eventually the population would dry up. Now, I know people will rebut this and say, well, that's not the case. We're not going to have a society where everybody's transgender or where everybody is gay. And I get that. That's true. That's not going to happen. But what's the tipping point there? The thing that that thought experiment kind of tells us is that there is a better way to do things and there's a not as good a way to do things. If nothing else, it tells us that the better way is that everybody in society could potentially be straight and married. That could work out, actually. We would have strong families and, that's the society that many of us would want, right? But everybody in society can't be the other thing. So that tells us at least that there's one option is better than another option. And so what the tipping point is for a society that works and functions and a society that doesn't, it's hard to say. Is it 25% gay society and we all just go to crap? Is it a 15%? Who knows? The point is that what are you going to be pushing towards? What are you going to be normalizing and standardizing? Now, okay, I've talked on that a good bit. I can keep going for days on that particular subject. Let's talk about another reason why it doesn't work. This whole thing of Z and Zir or him and whatever else. And I think in New York, I heard that there's like 30 some odd, there's a push for like 30 some odd different genders, or gender pronouns or non-gender specific pronouns that are being pushed. It doesn't work because it complicates language. Okay. The language is always by default pursuing simplicity. That's why we have so much figurative speech and these phrases that we use, idioms and stuff like that are just culturally significant, that are just packed with meaning. We don't have to describe these things, that we just know what they mean. In fact, this is actually one of the things that makes going back and reading some of the old Hebrew and stuff in the Bible, or even the Greek, a challenge, is because that they speak in idioms a lot and this very figurative language. And so you kind of have to parse out, what did that really mean? We say it's a drop in the bucket, or I've got an axe to grind, or I've got a chip on my shoulder, whatever the case is. These are all idioms. But we speak in this so much, it makes it difficult even for foreigners who come over here and try to learn the language to really understand these things as sort of concrete. They hear these things as concrete words, and they're not. They're figurative languages that have cultural meanings. And so language is always trying to simplify itself through just naturally and intuitively understood things. And when we introduce new words that don't necessarily describe something new, and it also complicates language, you're in for a serious uphill battle. And this may be more just from a marketing standpoint. They would want to know this. It's just a terrible thing to pursue from a marketing, if nothing else. People don't want to complicate things. You look at the LGBT movement, for example. You know what the LGBT movement really, really needs? They need somebody who has, who's an outsider, who's a minority, to come along that starts with the vowel. I mean, more than anything else right now, they need to get away from the LGBTQ, whatever. You can't do anything with that, right? And I'm being a little bit silly here, but honestly, from a marketing standpoint, it's just terrible. It just gets LGBTQR, triangle. Nobody knows what we're even talking about anymore. So you got to be clear on what it is that you're dealing with. And this comes as well when we're talking about dealing with men and with women. And so one of the reasons that we have a language that has been simplified to the point where we recognize males and females is because it's an easy way to identify someone and still respect their particular, their gender, right? And you got to think as well. We created a language that does identify people specifically by male or female. And in fact, we do this. If you look at the Spanish, for example, there's so many words that actually represent a feminine form versus a masculine form. And so they're very respecting of male and female. These things are very important. And it's obvious that they should be. And imagine trying to go into, a language like Spanish, where you've got things that end in la, right? That basically are a feminine form of the word. And you got to say, well, actually, that's not really, that's got to end in z or something like that. It gets way too complicated. It's just never going to stick. So just forget it. Just throw it out. That's not going to happen. What did society come up with that is probably offensive now? I don't know. What did society come up with that kind of refers to people who are transgender? Well, we came up with this term called sheum, right? Back in the day, probably the 80s, maybe the 70s. It fell out of favor probably in the 90s. I don't really know. But at some point, sheum was it's a she and a him kind of mixed together. That's the word that society came up with. Now, like I said, this is probably an offensive word to some people. I don't really know why, but maybe it is. My thoughts on this is that if gender is so fluid and a person can be one gender but be a biological sex of a different kind, and these things can kind of change throughout a person's lifetime, and they can even decide to be one or the other, or decide to be neither, why does it matter what pronoun you get called in the first place? If you get called a he, but you feel like a she, well, then just roll with it. Or if you get called a she, but you feel like a he, roll with it. If you get called a sheum because people are confused about what you are, then just roll with it. Because basically what you're saying is that gender doesn't matter, but you're putting a lot of emphasis on gender and on non-gender. And you can't have something that is supposed to really not matter that much and then also call for special rights to acknowledge the fact that it doesn't matter. Does that make sense? Now let me talk about this last piece here. And there are some complications, some true complications in our language that we're probably going to have to address at some point. And so I don't think that this whole conversation is moot. I don't think it's all for naught. We do refer to things as specific genders based on our perception of their gender, not necessarily their biological gender. We do this all the time. Take, for example, Amazon Alexa, right? Okay, so Alexa sounds like a lady, and again, I'm sure it's a female voice who recorded the thing, but obviously she has a lady's name, and she's meant to sound like a lady, so she gets referred to as a her. The same with Siri, I imagine. And so, even though it's really a robot, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a computerized voice that isn't necessarily a biological gender of any kind. And it doesn't totally surprise me, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the next generation or so that we have more non-gender conforming voices from robots or from computerized sources. I think this was actually in the Solo movie, right? I mean, there was the non-gender conforming robot. I didn't see the movie, but you can tell by the voice, you're kind of like, okay, what are you? You're a male or you're a female? You're kind of this, you're kind of that. I don't really know. But the point is that we do refer to things that aren't necessarily biologically gendered as a he or a she. We also do this when we personify things. You take a country, for example. It's usually, she is our motherland. Our native land is usually referred to as a she. We refer to mountains as she because they're beautiful, and maybe because they kind of look like breast to us. I don't really know. But anyhow, we refer to mountains as she's, but we refer to other things which are masculine as he's. And it has to do with the perception of gender. Certainly mountains can be masculine, and maybe sometimes in poems they're referred to as he's. I don't really know. But the point is that has to do with perception, and it also has to do with what we're trying to portray. If you're telling a story and you're trying to personify a rather, a non-person object. So let's say you're talking about the wind, and the wind is cold and bitter and mean. Maybe you call it a he because that has certain connotations. Maybe the wind is strong, and so that seems to fit. Maybe you refer to the wind as a she because that also has certain, connotations. And there are all kinds of reasons you'd want to do this in the storytelling, right? The character kind of has a backstory where things are not right with the dad, or things are not right with the mom. And so you're kind of trying to introduce this in very subtle ways, and storytellers do this all the time, and poets do this all the time, right? They take advantage of, these sort of ideas of what we have to be masculine or to be feminine, and they weave that into their storytelling or into their poetry, so that it promotes an image, right? Things that don't get personified as either a he or a she are really just it's. They're just objectified things. We don't really know what they are. They're just an object, and nobody wants to be an it. And so the challenge with transgender people, just as an example, my wife and I went to get ice cream we were in Asheville, and in Asheville, any day of the week, you're walking down the street uptown or downtown Asheville, you see all kinds of people, all kinds of makeups. You see gay couples, you see transgenders, you see it all, right? You see homeless people, and just the sad nature of things up there. But it's still a fun town, and there's still a lot of art and culture and things like that. Well, we went to get ice cream, and the person scooping the ice cream it took me a while to figure it out, actually. So I'm looking at this guy, and it's a man because he's got an Adam's apple, but he's also got like a bra thing on, and he's got his hair grown out, and he's trying to speak with a lower, kind of a softer tone, sort of Michael Jacksoning it up like this a little bit. And, but it took a little while for me to kind of go, what am I dealing with here? Is this a man or is this a woman? And it was a really good challenge for me to kind of think through my mind of like, I don't know how to perceive this person. I don't know how they want to be perceived. That's one obstacle. I also don't know how to perceive them. I don't know how I'm supposed to relate to them. What is the proper way in which I relate to them? Men have a different way in which they relate to women. We're not all the same gender and just buddy, and this isn't I don't know, some kind of weird futuristic, a weird place that we don't understand gender, and we all just treat each other like we're just brothers and sisters, and nobody thinks about each other differently. It doesn't work that way. When I see a woman, there's a certain relationship that I have with her. When a woman sees me, there's a certain relationship that she has with me. Maybe there's a bit of a distance there. Maybe it's important to have that, to maintain that. Maybe there's a bit of flirtatiousness there. And maybe that just sort of, underlines underscores some of the interactions there. I don't have those same relations with guys, right? I don't flirt with men. Men don't flirt with me, hopefully, in most cases, unless you're in Nashville. And so it challenges our perception of how we're supposed to deal with someone that we really don't know what they are or what they're trying to be. Is this a woman trying to be a man, or is a man trying to be a woman? And how do you respect them, and at the same time respect yourself? Because you see, there's a two-way street when it comes to relationship. Let's say you've got a friend who has been your friend for a very long time, and you've been growing up together, you've been pals, it's a guy, and you're best buds, and you go to the gym together, you work out together, you shower together, you laugh and joke together, you give each other bro hugs, and all this other kind of stuff, and then you find out that they're gay. You find out he's gay. Now, some of you are going to say, well, I don't see the big deal in that. And then let's say that you find out also that you kind of heard that he kind of likes you. All right, now some of you guys are starting to get uncomfortable. You find out that someone who was your friend and who had a certain kind of relationship now wants to have a different kind of relationship. And obviously this doesn't work. Now you can try to keep the friendship together and say, well, this is not going to work, dude. I'm straight, as it gets. I thought you were straight too. And, however you want to approach that and try to, keep the relationship, maybe you can. But most likely things aren't going to be exactly the same as they were before. Now, people would tell you that they ought to be, but it's not going to be. And let me tell you why. It's because relationship is a sacred thing. It is a very private, it is a very personal thing, and it has boundaries for reasons. My wife and I relate to each other in a way that me and other ladies don't relate to each other, right? Obviously. My male friends, and even my female friends and I, we relate to each other in a way that does have boundaries on it, right? That are different than the way that I relate to my wife, or even how I relate to my sons. Relationship is a sacred thing, and it is a very private and a very personal thing. And when someone wants to have a relationship with you in a way that feels uncomfortable, it upsets the dynamics of the relationship. Now, back to this whole thing being at the ice cream place in Asheville. When you see somebody that you don't know what kind of gender they are or what they're trying to be, the two-way street is this. You know they want to be respected and related to in a certain way, but you don't really know what that way is, because you don't know if it's a male trying to be a female or if it's a female trying to be a male a lot of times. You also don't know if you should even talk about that. You don't know what side of the street you should come down on. Am I supposed to refer to you as a male, and then that's really what you are, but you just like to dress up like a lady? Or am I supposed to refer to you as a female? Am I supposed to just keep you at a distance, which is usually what happens, right? The other thing is, how do I feel in terms of this relationship? Because I might not want to interact with you as an unknown gender. I might actually prefer for you to be one or the other. You see, that's the two-way street of respect. You're either one or you're the other. That's how my mind operates. And if you can't be that, then you and I are going to have a difficult time having a relationship, because my relationship operates in the world of straightness. And that means that I have a certain relationship with men, I have a different relationship with women, and I have a different relationship even with the women that I'm not married to. You see how it gets complex? And so we add in different genders, if that's even a thing, and it just gets extremely complex. Now, this is just seeing someone and talking to someone, and we're having these kinds of discussions. Imagine now, how we handle restrooms and privacy laws and so many other things. Imagine the difficulties that a doctor has when a patient comes in and they say this patient's a biological man, but he's been on female hormones for the last 10 years. And so what dose of adrenaline do you give them to help their system out? Or what a dose of whatever it is do you give them? I mean, the complications here, guys, are tremendous. So, look, I can't simplify this. This is going to be an ongoing discussion for some time, no doubt. But hopefully this gives you guys some things to talk about and to think about as we approach this. If you know somebody who's transgender, I think, and their friend, or there's somebody that you think you could just ask questions to, I say ask them questions. Hey, how do you want to be referred to? When somebody sees you, honestly, they may not be able to tell if you're a male or female. And that adds a lot of confusion and some anxiety in the relationship, interacting. How should they approach you? And what is your response going to be? This is a transgender person. What is your response going to be if they don't want to have a relationship with you in that way? If they cannot, or they refuse to, or they do not want to have a relationship where you're saying something that is not biologically what you are. At the end of the day, guys, we got to live with each other. We don't have to normalize things, but we do have to live amongst people that are different from us. So there has to be a level of respect there, no doubt about that. At the same time, that respect has to be a two-way street. I think these are really interesting times in one sense. They're really challenging times. My wife said to my son the other day in the car, she's like, Aiden, I'm just sorry that you had to grow up in this time frame and deal with all this nonsense. And, in one sense, I would agree. At the same time, I think that when we have families that are strong, we have children that understand what it means to be a man or a woman or a male or female, and they can be taught that rather than just take it as an assumption, an assumptive thing that we've done for so long. Well, there's men and there's women, and that's all there is. I think it's good to have them think through these things. And I think it's good to have us be challenged with these things. Let's make sure we're keeping the challenge going, and we're not just bowing down to whatever the social media world and the big media would have us believe is the right way to talk, the right way to speak. I don't want this to be 1984. All right, fellas, I can keep going on this, but I'm going to call it quits. This has been kind of a long episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these things. Let me know what you think about the Truck Talk Thursday. You can chime in on Instagram. You can chime in on our Facebook group. Just hit me up through email, whatever you want to do. I appreciate you guys. Take care.